In the closing months of World War II, as Europe burned and empires fractured, a second, quieter war began to unfold. One waged in sealed archives, coded transmissions, and corridors of power where names were erased as quickly as they were written. Beneath the surface of official history, buried operations and missing files formed a shadow network of secrecy that stretched from the collapsing bunkers of Berlin to the silent tundras of the Arctic Circle. What was hidden was never meant to be found. What survived was not meant to be told. And yet, fragments remain, scattered reports, half-burned communiques, and forgotten coordinates that whisper of the things the victors chose to bury along with the dead. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Lazarus. On April 27, 1945, as the Reich collapsed on all fronts, a coded order left the Führerbunker under the authorization of Generaloberst Alfred Jodl. The message was brief. Initiate Lazarus. Priority Alpha. Southbound under Nachtprotokoll. It was transmitted over a secure Enigma channel, later recovered in fragments by the British WWII service. The operation's codename, Lazarus, appeared only once in surviving Wehrmacht dispatches, buried beneath layers of logistics paperwork relating to the 11th Panzer Division's retreat through southern Germany. What those documents conceal is a disappearance that has haunted military historians for decades, the vanishing of an entire armoured convoy near the Austrian border during the war's final 8 days. Eyewitness accounts place the convoy's departure from Regensburg shortly before dawn. A column of 6 Sedkivzs, 251 half-tracks, 3 Opel Blitz trucks, and 2 armoured cars bearing the insignia of the 11th Panzer's supply group. Civilian witnesses later recalled the vehicles travelling without headlights, escorted by SS officers wearing the black and grey field uniforms of the Reich Main Security Office. Their destination, according to a partially declassified Allied intercept, was Zone K-17, a site not found on any German logistical map. Hours later, the convoy was seen entering the Bavarian Alps, heading south along a snow-choked mountain road leading toward the Brenner Pass. After that, nothing. Soviet field units advancing through Austria reported no contact. British and American aerial reconnaissance showed no evidence of destroyed vehicles or wreckage matching the convoy's configuration. In 1946, an OSS debrief of a captured SS adjutant from the 11th Panzer revealed a name linked to Lazarus, Dr. Heinrich Falken, a biochemist once attached to the Ahnenerbe Institute in Berlin. Falken's work, as outlined in confiscated documents, focused on weaponized contagions designed to degrade enemy morale and combat readiness, experiments so extreme that even SS oversight had restricted his research. After 1943, the adjutant described Falken as evacuated with essential cargo under direct orders from Reichsführer Himmler. The Allies initially dismissed Lazarus as a myth, born of the chaos of collapse. Yet in 1948, a British intelligence officer, Major Arthur Venning, reopened the case after discovering a sealed envelope in the Foreign Office archives labelled Lazarus, Eyes Only. Inside were 3 faded photographs, a snowbound mountain tunnel, the charred remains of a Wehrmacht radio set, and a single metal crate stamped with the Reichsadler insignia and serial code ALZ 1245. Attached was a note written in Venning's hand. Recovered from collapsed tunnel near Kufstein, 1947. Contents removed by US personnel before my arrival. Declassified. American records confirm that the US Army's 10th Mountain Division conducted a series of unexplained excavations in the Tyrolean Alps during that same period. The official purpose was to locate hidden Nazi gold, but internal memos reference biological materials requiring special containment. In one report, Major Edward R. Collins of the 430th CIC Counterintelligence Corps writes, recovered samples in sealed canisters. Immediate transfer to Camp Dietrich per Directive 54B. No further inquiries authorized. The reference to Camp Dietrich, later known as Fort Dietrich, the center of US biological weapons research, suggests a darker inheritance than post-war historians have ever publicly acknowledged. By 1952, Operation Lazarus had effectively vanished from all Allied correspondence. Files were reassigned under new identifiers, personnel reclassified, and the remaining documents marked obsolete, destroy. But fragments persisted in foreign intelligence archives. The Soviet GRU, through a defector in 1963, obtained microfilm copies of US field reports describing German contagion. Technology discovered near the Brenner Pass. The KGB's internal analysis noted unusual mortality among American personnel involved in site recovery, a statement later corroborated by Red Cross. Mortality data from 1947 showing an unexplained cluster of respiratory deaths among US servicemen stationed in Innsbruck. Then in 1979, an Austrian hiker exploring the Wilder Kaiser Mountains discovered a rusted steel door embedded in a rock face, partially obscured by vegetation. The markings, faint but visible, matched Wehrmacht construction standards for field depots. Reinforced bolts, triple seal locking mechanisms, and serial engravings beginning with WK. Austrian police opened an investigation but found the interior collapsed, filled with ice and debris. Within days, military engineers under NATO supervision sealed the entrance with concrete. The official statement cited risk of structural collapse. No mention was made of the crates visible in the initial photographs, taken by local rescuers, crates bearing the same eagle, insignia seen in Vennings recovered. Photo 30 years earlier. A final trace appeared in 94 when an anonymous package arrived at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. Inside were 3 rolls of 16mm film marked Brenner 45. The footage, grainy and silent, shows Wehrmacht vehicles parked in a snowy ravine. Men in SS uniforms are seen unloading crates and carrying them toward a tunnel entrance lined with concrete and steel. One of the frames briefly captures a sign painted with the words Sperrgebiet, Lazarus. Experts who examined the film could not verify its authenticity, but chemical analysis confirmed that both the film stock and uniforms dated to 1944-45. The footage disappeared from public access in 1995, reclassified under national security protection. The story of Operation Lazarus has since become a study in historical omission. No Allied report lists the final inventory of the convoy. No war crimes tribunal ever mentioned Dr. Heinrich Falken or his supposed research. The Ahnenerbe archives recovered by American forces in 1945 contain no reference to Lazarus beyond a single burned ledger. Its final entry reading only, "Consignment transferred to Southern Depot, directive fulfilled." Scholars who examined the entry note the handwriting matches that of SS Obersturmbannführer Konrad Behrens, an officer later implicated in human experimentation at Dachau before disappearing in April 1945. Today, the supposed burial site of the Lazarus convoy lies beneath the limestone ridges between Kufstein and Kitzbühel, an area known for its unstable caverns and wartime bunkers. Local villagers still tell stories of military trucks seen there in the weeks before Germany's surrender. Engines muffled, headlights covered. Some claim the ground still shifts during spring thaws, as if something deep below occasionally resettles. Austrian authorities have long forbidden excavation in the region, citing unexploded ordnance and geological instability. Whether Operation Lazarus was a last desperate attempt to conceal war crimes, preserve forbidden research, or simply vanish with the Reich itself remains uncertain. But the silence surrounding it, the vanished files, the missing officers, the sealed tunnels, speaks louder than any official denial. Somewhere beneath those mountains, the final chapter of a war most believe ended in 1945 still waits, sealed in cold stone and forgotten orders, under the codename that promised resurrection. Chapter 2. Echoes from the Arctic Listening Stations. By the winter of 1948, the Second World War's noise had faded into the static of a new, quieter conflict. The Cold War had begun, and with it came an unseen frontier. A war fought not with bombs or tanks, but with signals, frequencies, and silence. From the wind-bitten decks of naval trawlers to remote outposts along the Arctic Circle, an invisible network of listening posts stretched between superpowers. One of them was Project Iceward, a US Navy operation established under the Office of Naval Research. Officially, it was a scientific mission to monitor polar ice drift. Unofficially, it listened to what no one could explain. The project's first base was built at Thule Air Base in northwestern Greenland under cover of meteorological research. Construction began in late 1947, led by Commander Robert L. Henshaw, a veteran cryptologist from the Navy's Signal Intelligence Service. His orders came directly from Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, soon to become the first director of the CIA. Funding was traced through an innocuous channel labeled Polar Atmospheric Research Program, though internal memos marked the budget as priority red. The reason was simple. Since 1946, American naval patrols in the Barents Sea had intercepted structured bursts of Morse-like transmissions originating from coordinates north of 82-degree latitude, an area with no known Soviet presence, no stations, and no record of previous transmission. The signal was unlike anything conventional. It repeated at intervals of 11 minutes, with each sequence lasting precisely 42 seconds. When decrypted using both standard Enigma analogs and the newer NSA prototype decoders, the pattern revealed not language but mathematical progression, geometric spacing, recursive timing, and an impossible level of clock accuracy given the signal's power and distance. The first intercept came from USS Northampton, logged at 0200 hours, November 3, 1946. The final word in the message log, source below horizon. IceWard teams deployed throughout 1948 to 3 forward sites, designated Alpha, Bravo, and Fox along Greenland's ice shelf. The Bravo team, stationed 320 kilometers northeast of Thule, maintained direct monitoring equipment housed within a reinforced snow tunnel. The chief engineer, Lieutenant Thomas R. Kravitz, reported in his logbook dated February 17th, signal persistent. Origin appears beneath ice shelf, bearing consistent with coordinates 83D12N, 37 equipment stable. Personnel disturbed. 3 days later, Kravitz and his assistant failed to check in. The only transmission received from Bravo was a shortwave burst repeating a single word in Morse. Repeating. The site was found abandoned, equipment still active, rations untouched. Official reports list both men as missing due to weather exposure. Unofficially, the file was marked Unresolved IceWard. No recovery teams were dispatched. By summer, the Bravo site had been sealed and removed from US operational maps. Henshaw's notes, later found among declassified ONR documents, included a chilling marginalia beside the entry for the missing men. Echoes not external. Phase feedback loop, self-originating. Meanwhile, Soviet intelligence had been intercepting similar anomalies. In 1993, after partial opening of KGB archives, researchers discovered a file labeled 7E Zvon, translated, the Northern Ringing. Soviet submariners in the Kara Sea recorded identical transmissions beginning as early as 1947. The same rhythmic pulses, the same 11-minute intervals. According to internal memos, the GRU suspected the Americans of testing a deep ice communication array, but one annotation in the margin of a 1949 briefing reads, "Not American, not Soviet, not possible source identified." The file was closed in 1951 under direct order from Lavrentiy Beria, Stalin's feared security chief. Within the US Navy, Project IceWard continued under stricter secrecy. In late 1950, the project transferred to the newly formed National Security Agency. Thule's remaining files were boxed and labeled Inactive Meteorological. But in one of those boxes, discovered decades later by historian Dr. Alan McCreary, lay a reel-to-reel tape labeled IceWard.Fox06. The recording, though degraded, captured 37 minutes of atmospheric noise, followed by the unmistakable rhythmic pulse. But beneath the tone, barely audible, was something else. A low modulation that sounded, unmistakably, like a human voice repeating in broken intervals. Audio engineers from MIT who examined the tape in 1999 reported non-random amplitude spikes that could indicate speech. The transcript McCreary produced contained fragments of recognizable English words. Under ice, listening, repeat. The Navy denied the tape's authenticity, but independent verification of its material composition confirmed it was genuine late 1940s stock. The reel was confiscated by federal authorities within weeks of its discovery, citing national security implications. No copy exists today except for McCreary's handwritten transcript, preserved in a private archive in Reykjavik. The Thule station remained active until a fire in 1952 destroyed its primary communications facility. The cause was officially listed as electrical overload, but according to a declassified Air Force memo dated March 4, 1952, Major Stephen D. Ralston reported seeing a light column rising from the ice moments before the incident, a vertical beam that dissipated in less than a second. The report was redacted, and Ralston was reassigned to Okinawa. Ice Ward was permanently terminated later that year. All remaining materials were transferred to Fort Meade, Maryland, under file series Echo Polar. Yet whispers of the Arctic signals never ceased. In 1957, during the International Geophysical Year, Soviet and American researchers jointly recorded unexplained under-ice acoustic phenomena. The scientific community labeled them cryoseismic events. But several classified Navy hydrophone reports from the same period show patterns identical to the Ice Ward signal. Repeating sequences, geometric pacing, exact 11-minute spacing. Civilian scientists never saw those reports. By the late 1960s, technological progress buried the mystery under new crises. Cuba, Vietnam, space. The Arctic listening posts were abandoned, consumed by frost and time. Only decades later did fragments resurface. A 1983 satellite sweep by NOAA detected an intermittent transmission at 83° latitude, identical in frequency to the Ice Ward intercepts of 1948. Analysts dismissed it as an echo from solar activity. Still, for 23 minutes, the Arctic whispered the same mathematical pulse last heard when the world was just beginning to freeze over again. What remains of Project Ice Ward exists only in redacted reports and fading magnetic tape. The names of the missing men are etched into a memorial wall at Thule under training losses. No mention of their mission, no explanation of their signal. Some claim their final transmission, signal repeating, was not a warning, but an observation, that whatever they were hearing had always been there, beneath the ice, beneath the silence, waiting for someone to listen again. Chapter 3: The Phantom Files of Operation Paperclip. By the summer of 1945, the guns of Europe had fallen silent, but within the corridors of the US War Department, a new race had begun, not to end a war, but to secure the minds that had built one. Operation Paperclip, approved under Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, oversight, was designed to transfer Germany's most valuable scientific assets into American custody before the Soviets could claim them. Official records would later state that 1,600 scientists, engineers, and technicians were relocated under this program. Unofficially, at least 2,000 names were logged, many under pseudonyms, with a shadow registry existing alongside the legitimate list. These missing dossiers became known to a select few intelligence officers as the Phantom Files. The Phantom Files began as a bureaucratic anomaly. In late 1946, a clerk within the War Department's Technical Intelligence Division noted a gap in sequential case numbers, missing entries between JIOA case files 322A through 338F. When the error was reported, the supervising officer ordered the matter dropped, citing clerical compression. But a carbon copy of the memo survived, unearthed decades later in the archives of the Defense Personnel Records Center. Those missing file numbers corresponded to a transfer manifest marked Project 63B, authorized by Colonel Donald L. Putt, a liaison between Air Technical Intelligence Command and the nascent US Air Force. What Project 63B entailed has never been publicly disclosed, though internal correspondence links it to a series of installations in the New Mexico desert, specifically near White Sands Proving Ground and Holloman Air Force Base. Among the missing names was that of Dr. Ernst Kallmorgen, a propulsion specialist formerly with the Peenemünde rocket facility. His official paperclip file ends in September 1946, when he reportedly arrived in Fort Bliss, Texas. Yet a declassified FBI memorandum dated February 1950 lists Kallmorgen as untraceable, presumed relocated. When the CIA's internal registry was digitized in the 1990s, his personnel entry appeared flagged with the designation inactive, no record of entry. But in 1954, an Air Force budget ledger for Holloman lists recurring payments to Consultant EK, Project Nova, a program classified above top secret and outside congressional oversight. Rumors surrounding Project Nova suggest it involved propulsion anomalies derived from incomplete German wartime experiments. Laboratory notes found in a Stuttgart bunker in 1945 contained blueprints for an engine based on plasma flow containment, marked Geheim Kommandosache, Magnetoplasma Antrieb. The original design was dismissed by Allied analysts as theoretical. Yet test logs recovered decades later by investigative journalist Marion Keller in 1981 showed that in August 1947, 2 months after Cal Morgan's name vanished, Holloman engineers conducted high-altitude tests involving ionized exhaust emission inconsistent with known fuels. Those logs bore the same handwriting as Cal Morgan's wartime entries. The Phantom files extend beyond engineering. A separate strand points to biological research under Paperclip's umbrella. Several former SS physicians, initially rejected due to their involvement in human experimentation, were reportedly granted clearance under altered identities. One such figure, Dr. Hans Kruger, appears in JIOA memos as an expert in neurobehavioral conditioning. A handwritten note beside his name reads, "Transferred via NOVA protocol." A 1977 Freedom of Information Act request for Kruger's dossier returned the response. No record found. 2 years later, a Senate subcommittee investigation into human experimentation quietly reviewed a classified annex labeled NOVA, Non-Voluntary Testing, 1948-52. Its contents were never released. The term Phantom Files first surfaced publicly in 1967 when a former Army archivist, James Halbrook, claimed in an interview that hundreds of paperclip scientists never made it into the books. Halbrook described entire shipments of documents flown from Frankfurt to Wright Field, only to be diverted upon arrival to non-existent installations. Days after the interview aired, Halbrook's apartment in Arlington was ransacked. No official investigation followed. The television network later received a national security request to pull the segment from circulation. It remains missing from their archives. Declassified CIA cables between 1951 and 1953 hint at internal conflict over these covert transfers. A message dated December 22, 1951, from Frankfurt Station to Washington references scientific assets redirected through Operation Nova by Air Force intelligence, no coordination with agency. Another, intercepted by the National Security Council, warns that subject matter may violate Geneva protocols. Those cables were signed by an agent identified only as R. Hanlon. When cross-referenced with personnel rosters, no such agent appears in any CIA record. By the 1960s, most legitimate paperclip scientists had been absorbed into NASA, the Department of Defense, or private contractors. Their contributions to aerospace, rocketry, and medicine became part of official history. The rest, those without records, without acknowledgement, faded into the bureaucratic void. But in 1973, when President Nixon ordered the declassification of certain World War II intelligence files, archivists discovered a reference sheet misfiled under the Department of Energy. It listed 37 file identifiers, all beginning with the prefix P63B, followed by cryptic subject tags: Subterranean Facility Alpha, Thermal Propulsion Array, Behavioral Adaptation Unit, and, most curiously, Recovered Artifactual Material. Every one of those files was marked Destroyed, Directive 01049C. The signature on the destruction order belonged to Brigadier General Nathan Twining, who at that time had already retired. In 1998, a former NSA contractor, Charles Meeker, leaked microfilm images to investigative journalists showing GEOA rosters with blacked-out names corresponding to those missing entries. One annotation, dated 1949, references 12A Trial Series White Sands Sector. No additional context is given, but among intelligence historians, 12A has become synonymous with whatever the Phantom Files represented, the lost core of Operation Paperclip's unacknowledged offspring. Today, official narratives describe Paperclip as a pragmatic, if controversial, scientific recruitment effort. Yet among those who have seen fragments of the true record, the consensus is darker. The Phantom Files were not about science, they were about continuity. About ensuring that certain research, certain experiments did not end in 1945, but continued under new flags and false names. Somewhere in the depths of American archives, beneath layers of classification and decades of redaction, those erased scientists remain, not vanished, merely hidden, their legacies scattered through black budgets, sealed vaults, and forgotten desert laboratories. And every so often, a number surfaces, a serial tag, a lab code, a payroll stub, whispering the same unanswered question: where did Project 63B end, And what did the United States truly inherit from the ruins of the Reich? Chapter 4. The Black Vaults of Dresden. When the Allied bombers reached Dresden on the night of February 13, 1945, the city became an inferno. Firestorms consumed streets, archives, and cathedrals in equal measure, erasing centuries of history in less than 48 hours. Amid the chaos, German intelligence officers enacted a final order under the codename Valkyrie Red. Its objective: to safeguard a specific cache of state security records, high-level communications, and personal files from the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. The documents, estimated at over 30,000 microfilm reels, were packed into sealed metal crates and transported to the sub-basement vaults of the Dresden State Bank on Wettinerstrasse. According to an RSHA log fragment recovered in 1946, the vaults were secured and sealed with thermal countermeasures. No mention of them appears in any surviving German surrender inventory. These became known in post-war intelligence circles as the Black Vaults of Dresden. When Soviet troops entered the ruined city in May 1945, the entire banking district was a cratered wasteland. Yet beneath the rubble, the reinforced substructure of the state bank remained intact. Soviet engineers under the NKVD's 10th Directorate reported discovering access tunnels blocked by melted iron and fused concrete, signs of thermite demolition. One engineer's field note, preserved in the central archives of the Russian Ministry of Defense, describes charred remains of cabinets and paper fragments partially vitrified by extreme heat. Among the debris was a single unburned film canister marked Valkyrie R-17-1. Inside were microfilm slides containing personal dossiers of SS officers, including names absent from Allied post-war trials. Many bore a crimson stamp reading "Transferred, Nachtglas." For decades, Western intelligence agencies regarded Nachtglas as an NKVD retrieval effort. However, recently declassified East German documents indicate Project Nachtglas began in 1961, a covert Stasi operation directed by General Erich Mielke himself. Its purpose: to locate and recover surviving Nazi archives that the Soviets had failed to secure during occupation. Internal memoranda between Mielke and Moscow's KGB liaison described Dresden as zone of extreme archival interest. In June 1962, an excavation crew working under a municipal redevelopment contract reported uncovering sealed tunnels with iron bulkheads beneath the reconstructed Altmarkt. The following week, the site was abruptly cordoned off by East German security forces, and the civilian crew was reassigned. No public explanation was given. What happened inside that cordoned zone remains classified under former GDR law, but one surviving Stasi engineer, interviewed after reunification, recalled descending into a chamber lined with blackened metal racks and finding rows of sealed containers marked with the Reichsadler emblem. He described crates bearing numeric series identical to those listed in a lost OSS capture list, particularly KR-120 through KR-145, which corresponded to files relating to the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office. These files, according to wartime inventory records, contained documentation of confiscated property, forced labor statistics, and experimental medical data from concentration camps. The engineer claimed the crates were removed at night by Soviet trucks and transported east. 2 days later, the tunnel entrance was collapsed using explosives. In 1974, a classified memorandum circulated among NATO intelligence. Officers titled "Recovered RSHA Archives, Dresden, Zone." The memo summarized Western intercepts of East German communications, referring to a transfer operation successful, contents secured to Moscow under Director S. The Director S referenced is widely believed to be Yuri Andropov, then head of the KGB. The report concludes that at least 18 containers from the Black Vaults reached Soviet custody. No record exists of their inventory, but cross-referenced, Soviet documents reveal mentions of archival items of high scientific and ideological sensitivity. Some intelligence historians believe these files included proof of Nazi foreign funding networks, industrial collusion, and biological research later exploited by Soviet laboratories in the 1950s. Meanwhile, Dresden's reconstruction continued above ground. The site of the former state bank became a government building for the East German Ministry of Finance. Beneath its foundations, however, local workers occasionally uncovered warped steel beams and melted safes that bore remnants of pre-war numbering systems. Between 1975 and 1983, multiple civilian reports describe security agents arriving to seize such finds before they could be catalogued. By the time of German reunification in 1990, the surviving sections of the vaults were sealed with reinforced concrete. The official reason: ground instability. Yet municipal engineering blueprints show additional access corridors never listed in the public record, leading deep beneath the building's modern structure. In 1992, following the fall of the Soviet Union, a brief opening of Moscow archives revealed inventory records referencing Dresden document storage, Vault Section 12. The files were marked temporarily inaccessible due to biological contamination risk. No further information was released before the archives were reclassified. A year later, an anonymous microfilm reel surfaced in Berlin, sold at a flea market. Its contents were grainy photographs of catalogue cards, RSHA personal files labelled Special Medical Unit, South Tyrol. One card bore the notation, "Transferred to Dresden, 12th of February 1945. The implication was that Valkyrie Red had preserved data not merely political or bureaucratic, but experimental in nature, data some believed too valuable to destroy. Today, the legend of the Black Vaults endures among researchers of lost wartime archives. The precise location of the sealed tunnels remains uncertain, obscured beneath layers of reconstruction and decades of silence. Ground-penetrating radar surveys commissioned by private historians in 2008 detected several anomalous voids beneath the old banking district, but excavation permits were denied. Official responses cite risk to heritage foundations. When questioned in 2015, a German Interior Ministry spokesperson stated that no classified material remained buried in Dresden, yet no agency has ever produced the supposed recovery inventory. Some believe the true contents of the Black Vaults were far more consequential than personnel, files, perhaps financial records linking industrial giants to wartime atrocities, or documents detailing secret post-war agreements between captured Nazi scientists and Allied powers. Others suggest the vaults contained the missing ledgers of Action Reinhard, the operation that funneled millions in confiscated assets from extermination camps. Whatever truth lies beneath Dresden, it remains frozen between the pages of history and the stone of its rebuilt streets. In a city once reduced to ashes, a labyrinth of silence endures underground. Beneath the new facades and polished memorials, the Black Vaults remain sealed, a crypt of records, names, and evidence that could rewrite the moral ledger of the 20th century. And those who have glimpsed even fragments of those files all share the same conclusion. What Dresden hid in its final hours was not lost to fire, but to deliberate burial, entombed in secrecy deeper than any grave. Chapter 5. Ghost Signals of the U-977 Transmission. When Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schäfer surrendered U-977 to Argentine naval authorities on August 17, 1945, he presented his story as one of loyalty and survival. The war had ended while his submarine was still at sea, and, rather than surrender to the Allies in Europe, he claimed to have fled south, spending 66 days submerged en route to Argentina. The official record accepted his account as credible, but the interrogations conducted by British and American intelligence told a more disquieting story. For during that silent voyage, somewhere in the South Atlantic, U-977 transmitted an unsanctioned radio signal, Signal Trident 5V, a transmission whose origin, purpose, and recipient have never been explained. The message was first intercepted by a Royal Navy monitoring station on Ascension Island at 03:14 GMT, July 10, 1945. The signal was short, precisely 27 seconds, consisting of Morse bursts that initially appeared to be standard Kriegsmarine tactical code. When decrypted by Bletchley Park analysts, the content read, Trident 5 confirmed, await contact, Nordwind. At that point in the war, German communications infrastructure had ceased to exist. Any transmission would have had to be made manually from a functioning U-boat transmitter. The notation Nordwind was particularly troubling, as Operation Nordwind, the final German offensive in France, had ended months earlier. British intercept officers flagged the message for post-war investigation under the Naval Enigma Recovery Program. According to declassified Allied interrogation files, Schäfer was questioned repeatedly about the transmission. He denied sending any signal during the Atlantic crossing and insisted that the submarine remained under strict radio silence. Yet maintenance logs recovered from U-977's onboard equipment show the transmitter was calibrated and active on July 9th, 1 day before the signal was received. The calibration record was signed not by Schäfer, but by Funkmatt radio operator Karl Adolf Rössler, who died mysteriously in 1946 while under detention at the US Naval Base in Boston. The coroner's report listed self-inflicted wound, though the weapon was never found. An internal OSS memorandum dated September 2, 1945, describes Trident V as of anomalous structure and potential coded significance. Cross-analysis with decrypted U-boat traffic revealed no other instance of the Trident designation. In 1948, the US Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, compiled a classified study on post-war U-boat movements in the Southern Hemisphere. Appendix 4, now partially declassified, includes an entry reading, unverified contact, shadow vessel registered at coordinates 34°50s, 18°21W, 10th of July 1945. Subsurface displacement consistent with Type 9 hull, but unmarked. The coordinates correspond to an empty sector of the South Atlantic, roughly 200 kilometers west of Cape Town. British destroyer HMS Celtic recorded sonar contact with an unidentified object in the same region 3 hours after the Trident V intercept. The US Navy, alarmed by the possibility of an escaped U-boat flotilla, launched Operation Caesar in 1947 to investigate. Tasked with surveying reported anomalies in the South Atlantic, Caesar deployed 2 destroyers and a Catalina reconnaissance aircraft. Their official mission, hydrographic mapping. Unofficially, they searched for what ONI called German residual activity. The final report, stamped Eyes Only, lists unexplained sonar returns at identical intervals to the 1945 coordinates. The conclusion reads simply, acoustic resonance inconsistent with marine fauna or geological origin. Possible artificial source. The commander of the mission, Captain Robert McFall, later told a Senate inquiry in 1958 that he was instructed never to mention the secondary objective of the Caesar deployment. The myth of U-977 deepened in 1950 when a classified Argentine naval memo surfaced describing a shadow submarine detected 3 days before Schäfer's surrender. Coastal radar near Mar del Plata recorded 2 separate blips entering Argentine waters, though only 1 vessel ever surfaced. The second target disappeared abruptly at a depth of 70 meters. Schäfer's own surrender log lists no accompanying craft, yet a British naval attaché in Buenos Aires reported inconsistencies between crew testimony and vessel manifest. 2 of U-977's sailors were reportedly removed by Argentine intelligence before Allied interrogators arrived and were never accounted for in subsequent prisoner exchanges. What makes Trident V so enduringly mysterious is not the signal itself, but its reappearance. In April 1950, a classified ONI communication monitoring operation off the coast of Brazil intercepted a near-identical burst on the same frequency as the 1945 transmission. The duration was the same. The code, when decrypted, read, "Confirmed Trident V. Second phase active." By then, the Kriegsmarine had ceased to exist, and no surviving U-boat was known to operate under those channels. Analysts speculated the message was a Soviet test using captured German equipment. However, internal CIA notes indicate that Soviet archives contained no record of such transmissions and that the message source was triangulated, once again, to the mid-Atlantic trench line near the earlier contact zone. In 1964, an American oceanographic expedition aboard USS Bowditch detected irregular magnetic anomalies and metallic readings along the same coordinates. The ship's log describes cylindrical ferrous signatures, static at 900 meters depth. When a tethered sonar array was deployed, the data recorder registered a faint rhythmic clicking, spaced at 10-second intervals. The mission's acoustic specialist, Lieutenant James Harcourt, noted in his report, "Pattern identical to U-boat emergency beacon interval structure, model 1943, but too deep for standard distress emission." 2 days after returning to port, Harcourt was reassigned and the incident report reclassified. Under maritime acoustic anomalies, rumors persisted throughout the Cold War. Argentine naval historians spoke of classified sonar images showing sunken steel structures near the continental shelf. In 1977, the Soviet research vessel Akademik Kurchatov reportedly detected periodic radio noise in the same sector, described in ship's logs as Germanic code signatures. The entry was later struck through and replaced with atmospheric interference. In 1991, after the collapse of the USSR, a former GRU signals analyst claimed his division had been monitoring recurring transmissions on obsolete naval channels since 1950, identical in cadence to Trident V. His testimony was never officially corroborated. Perhaps the most disturbing evidence emerged in 2001, when a declassified NOAA sonar scan from an undersea survey picked up what appeared to be the outline of a 76-meter submarine hull consistent with the type YXC model used by U-977, lying at an oblique angle along the Atlantic Ridge, 900 meters down. The vessel's identification numbers were unreadable, and its conning tower was missing. When a follow-up expedition was proposed, the Navy declined, citing budgetary constraints. Privately, a NOAA technician who reviewed the sonar data remarked that the object appeared too intact for its supposed age. The question of what signal Trident V truly represented remains unanswered. Was it a coded distress signal, a last communication to an unknown ally, or the echo of a second U-boat that never surfaced? The surviving fragments of Bletchley Park's intercept logs note one more anomaly. A brief but measurable response transmission received exactly 11 minutes after the original signal. Not from the surface, but from below the oceanic thermocline at a depth impossible for 1940s technology. The return pulse repeated a single sequence, 3 dots, 1 dash, 3 dots, Morse for SOS, but inverted in tone and phase, as if it were an echo from something transmitting upward through the water. In the years since, legends have filled the silence left by missing files. Some say U-977's journey was not a flight to safety, but a rendezvous with another craft, part of a desperate evacuation of secrets. Others insist the ghost signals still flicker across old naval frequencies, too faint to trace, too precise to dismiss. What is certain is that every attempt to close the file on Trident V has only deepened its enigma. Beneath the calm waters of the South Atlantic, where light never reaches, something continues to whisper across the static, a remnant of a war that never entirely ended, calling from the deep. Even now, fragments of these stories remain scattered like debris across time, whispers of convoys that vanished in the mountains, signals that pulsed beneath the ice, and files that were erased, yet never gone. Each lead ends in a sealed archive, a missing report, a name crossed out in black ink. History insists the Second World War ended in 1945, but in the classified margins, in the frozen frequencies and buried vaults, it still lingers, unfinished, half erased, and waiting. Somewhere, behind locked doors and forgotten corridors, of memory, the last pages of that war remain unwritten, waiting for the next archivist brave or foolish enough to turn them.